Hey there, this is Natalie, and if you're new here, I'm normally an anime channel, but for the past 2 years, I've been playing through the Yakuza series, and having reached the end of the Kazuma Kiryu saga, I just really wanted to talk about the games. Yes, they are Japanese, they're set in fictional districts of real Japanese cities, they're packed with Japanese tropes and cultural references, and most of them are only available with Japanese audio and subtitles, which makes it much easier to recommend them to my beautiful audience of weebs than to just about anyone else. Plus, with all of the melodrama and epic fights, as well as a very Japanese story structure that focuses on twists and changes in situation rather than only on conflict to drive the narrative, it's easy to say that the Yakuza series is anime as balls. But the Yakuza games are not anime games. And in fact, references to anime, manga, visual novels, and other otaku stuff are pretty minimal. Instead, you get to play out interesting crime thriller storylines with characters likeable and nuanced enough to justify just how much of the time you spend in each game is them talking. And these characters look like real people, rather than stylized anime characters. In fact, many character models used in the games are based on their voice actors, so they look like actual living people. They talk like real people too, or at least they talk like people from live-action movies, or more realistically, soap operas, rather than having the kind of dialogue quirks that make the way anime characters speak distinct from normal humans. Even the settings, while always fictionalized, are based on real districts of Japanese cities like Tokyo and Osaka, and allow you to interact with shops, restaurant chains, and other things from the real world. Maybe to Japanese players who obviously won't find going in a Don Quixote and listening to the shop's jingle while picking out Boss brand canned coffee quite as exotic as I do, this actually just feels like the product placement it is, but it also adds this sense of realistic mundanity to the setting that makes you feel like, when the drama and shirtless beatdowns aren't happening, you're inhabiting what could be someone's real life. Getting enthusiastic about a great meal in a restaurant, going to karaoke with a friend, getting suddenly into some random new hobby like pocket stock car racing or fishing, trying to decide what to say next to someone you're flirting with, or sucking at Virtua Fighter. It probably is to real life in downtown Tokyo what the British soap opera EastEnders is to life in London, but outside of the often over-the-top dramatic plots and very effective comic relief, there's something far more grounded about it that makes for a different experience than the anime-like combat and themes might suggest on the surface. So, while I do think the series is an easier sell to my weeby brethren than to other Western consumers, this is not really an anime thing. It's its own thing, and I think it's bloody brilliant. This is going to be part a massive recommendation that you play the Yakuza games if you haven't already, and part just to look back at what's so great about the series for those of you who have. But if you like the idea of more Yakuza content and want me to do some deeper dives into things like the characters and plot lines, like I usually do for anime series like Mushoku Tensei and Re:Zero, then hit the like button, because I already have so much I could talk about with the Yakuza series that it's unreal, and I haven't even finished playing them all yet. So, let's talk about the practical stuff. What are the games, and how do you get into the series? The Yakuza series is published by SEGA and made by Ryuga Gotoku Studios, Ryuga Gotoku, or Like a Dragon, being the name of the series in Japan. The very first game, now usually referred to in the West as Yakuza 1, was released on PS2 in 2005 in Japan, and 2006 in the West. Though, as I'll come to, you don't need to cope with PS2 graphics and gameplay if you want to play through the whole series now, as the first 2 games have received full remakes in the engines of the more recent games, and Yakuza 3, 4 and 5 have also been fully remastered. The mainline games are Yakuza 1 to 6 and the prequel Yakuza Zero, all of which centre around original series protagonist Kazuma Kiryu, and then the latest instalment, called Yakuza Like a Dragon in the West, but also known as Yakuza 7, which starts a whole new saga in the Yakuza universe with a new protagonist, and also introduces turn-based JRPG-style combat into the mix. I haven't played Like a Dragon yet, though I'm really looking forward to getting to it once I finish 6, so I won't really be talking about the new direction the franchise is taking in this video, but it has been very well received and I have high hopes. As well as these, there's the off-canon zombie game Yakuza Dead Souls, and the spin-off detective franchise set in the same universe, Judgment, which currently has 2 critically acclaimed games, though I want to finish the main series before getting into that, so I haven't played them yet either. Plus, there are 2 spin-offs that take the form of historical action thrillers set in feudal Japan, using the same mechanics and using the same characters in a kind of remixed way, which are called Kenzen and Ishin. These 2 haven't been localised for the West, so playing through them story-wise if you don't speak Japanese requires a bit of faffing around with guides and translations, but some people consider them even better than the mainline games, so I really hope subtitled versions become a thing in some way or another in the future. There are also some smaller spin-off projects and crossovers, but these 8 mainline games, the 2 Judgment games, Dead Souls, Kenzen and Ishin, are the ones that share the same type of format, and given the sheer amount of content in each game, once you're into the franchise, you'll pretty much never run out of things to play. When I said I'd been playing the Yakuza series for 2 years, it's actually almost all I've been playing for 2 years. And while I do tend to mainly play single-player RPG type things that can take months to get through, so I do usually only complete a few games a year, the fact that a decent amount of that 2 years was spent in lockdown, with plenty of hours to spend gaming each week, and I've still only finished Yakuza 0 and 1 through 5, most of them at nowhere near 100% completion, gives you some idea of how much bang for your buck you get with an entry in this series. Yes, you can see estimates online for how long you can complete each game in if you only focus on the critical path, and some of these are around the 30-hour mark, even for the biggest entry, Yakuza 5, but realistically, you're not going to want to just play through the story. Even if, like me, you're not especially bothered about trophies and 100% completion, and just want to play for as long as it remains fun, it's very unlikely that if these games are something you get into, you'll be wanting to blast through the main storyline only. People have certainly put well over 100 hours into every game in this series, and while my own stats are a bit messed up because I sometimes leave my Xbox switched on with the game paused for hours while I get distracted by something else, like a ditzy idiot, I'm pretty sure I'm at over 100 hours on at least 4 of the ones I've played. Now, all of the mainline games, or at least the latest remakes and remasters of them, are now available on Xbox and PC, as well as PlayStation, and at the time of writing this video, many of them are included on Xbox Game Pass, so if you have that, you can get all of this bang for hardly any of your bucks. But while it might not seem like that big of a deal that the series is available on all platforms now, it was actually the games finally making the move from being PlayStation exclusive that caused me to finally get into the franchise, and I think it did a lot to boost the popularity of the games in the West too. Their profile had already been drastically raised in the West with the release of Yakuza Zero, which, as well as being considered by many to be the best game in the series, also gave people a good starting point for getting into the games. The games each have standalone stories, but there is a lot of continuity, and jumping in at, say, Yakuza 5 would leave you having to catch up on years of previous history between the characters, with Yakuza 0 being set in the 1980s and showing the origins of both Kazuma Kiryu and fan favourite Goro Majima, Majima only previously having been a playable character in the non-canon zombie spin-off. It added a lot for existing fans to get excited about, but it also allowed a new generation of fans to have a starting point for the Kazuma Kiryu saga. following up Zero with 4 remakes of Yakuza 1 and 2 called Kiwami and Kiwami 2, meant that new players could then continue the story after Zero in order, while still playing similarly modern iterations in terms of graphics and gameplay. Of course, Kiwami, as a remake of 1, also makes for a good starting point for people who'd rather play through the games in release order and get to Zero later when they're already invested in Kiryu and Majima. Yakuza 7, or Like a Dragon, offers another good jumping on point, where the events of the other 7 games are still canon, but there's a new protagonist and a focus on a new city, so you don't need to have experienced everything in the other mainline games to understand all but some minor references. Or the other jumping on point is to start with Judgment, which offers a new and ongoing series in the same universe, so it's a bit less daunting than staring down the 7 games about Kazuma Kiryu right from the start. With so many good starting points for new players released after Yakuza 5 in the West, the series was already seeing a big uptick in interest, and bringing it over to Xbox and PC opened it up to even more new fans. Still, I got on board with Zero. I'd always watched videos about the Yakuza games and thought they looked like something I'd love, but I was always on Xbox, so I just kind of had it in the back of my mind that one day I'd get a cheap PS4 just to play them. But then, during the early days of what ended up being a very long lockdown where I live in Italy at the start of 2020, I was browsing Xbox Game Pass for a big long game to get into and saw Yakuza Zero had arrived on Xbox One. It would be no exaggeration to say that that game got me through lockdown. While other people found some comfort in faffing around with Animal Crossing, for me, Yakuza Zero, and then as they began to release for the Xbone, Kiwami and Kiwami 2, gave me just what I needed. Each entry, especially Zero, had an interesting and exciting story that broke up that period in 2020 when it seemed like a lot was happening, but there was nothing to do. The combat aspect of the gameplay was fun and cathartic, and trying to emulate Kazuma Kiryu's Tom for Heat move from Kiwami 2 on my boyfriend in some way helped with the gyms being closed. Disclaimer, we both train martial arts and do that kind of thing in a sporting and consensual way. That wasn't me casually referencing domestic violence. Still, most of all, the ability to roam around the city doing all the stuff I was missing doing for real, like just going to restaurants and bars and talking to randos, kind of took the edge off of being stuck inside for months. But if that makes it sound mundane, then it's really not that at all. This is where I need to talk about what makes the Yakuza games so unique when compared to other games with brawler-type combat, other games with melodramatic crime thriller plotlines, and other open-world games where you can amuse yourself in lots of different ways between story missions. See, the Yakuza games are not like something like GTA, where you can do pretty much whatever you want, regardless of how out of character your behaviour then makes your player character feel during the story parts. Depending on the game, you play as either Kazuma Kiryu or up to 4 other characters who are or become connected to him. Who you are playing as and which city you're playing in is determined by the part of the story you're in, though the games with more than one playable character do have opportunities before the climax, once everything's come together in the story, for you to switch between the characters and travel to different places with them. Whichever character you're controlling though, they're one of the good guys in the story, and they have their own objectives, plot and character-wise. Although you have plenty of options when you're roaming around the city with them, to choose how you want to amuse yourself from all that the nightlife has to offer, and these games largely take place in red light districts, so you don't have to play as a good Christian boy or anything. You still can't, say, start fights with random people. Combat outside of story sequences is initiated by random people starting on you, and switches gameplay to a different mode where you can use all of your double hard bastard skills until the fight is over. You can't vandalize things outside of combat, you can't steal. You, canonically at least, never kill anyone, even though you definitely wail on people in ways that would certainly not be survivable in real life. And you don't really ever get the option to be a dick to NPCs in an out-of-character way. It's not a choices matter type game either, where you make major decisions on behalf of your character. You're playing through their story, and so despite the huge amount of freedom you have in terms of how you have fun with the game at any given time, really the choices you make as your character just amount to whether you want to engage in given side stories or activities and how you want to fight in the combat sections. You don't have control over the kind of person they are or what path they take. You can politely say no to helping someone with their side quest, though you probably won't most of the time because the side stories in these games are hilarious, and if anything, you'll be seeking them out. But that's about it. If the character you're playing as makes what you think is a terrible decision in the plot, you have to go with it and see what the consequences are. And because of this, because you're playing as this person with a lot of established characterization, it would actually feel really strange to be able to rampage around a city, often a city that, story-wise, you're trying to protect, stealing things and murdering all the hookers. There's no good or evil, paragon or renegade way to play Yakuza, and it's not supposed to represent a cathartic lawlessness where you can blow off steam, like the sandbox parts of GTA games often can. So when you're wandering around in the open world, you're interacting with it like a normal person, or at least as normal as any of the playable characters can be said to be, and this kind of respect for your surroundings and the fondness for the various weirdos you help out around town really creates this sense of investment and immersion. Even when what you're doing in a sub-story or the main plot can become wild or absurd, or of course illegal, it is a game about organised crime after all, you still feel like you're a person in a real city, not a god messing around with a simulation of one. So, I haven't really gone into the plots of the games or even the sub-stories in the Yakuza series in this video, because I want to avoid spoilers and really just encourage those of you who haven't played any of the games yet to give them a try, based on the kind of experience you can expect, rather than on any particular high points. But I would like to do some videos going more into the writing and stories, given that's the type of content I usually make about anime. So if you're someone who's played the games and you have a particular character or storyline you'd like to see a deeper dive video about, then please let me know in the comments. Thank you as always to my supporters on Patreon and to everyone who helps me out by subscribing to my channel and watching my videos. Thank you for watching this one, and I hope to see you again very soon.